She showed up barefoot in December with a letter that was not hers. He read it anyway. The woman appeared at the door of the house on Copper Hill Road at dusk on the 14th of December, 1886, and she was barefoot on the frozen ground, which was notable because the ground was frozen, and because December in the mountains of western North Carolina is not a month that forgives the absence of shoes. Her feet were red and swollen and cracked at the heels with dried blood in the cracks, and the hem of her dress was torn and muddy, and she was holding a letter in both hands, holding it the way a person holds something that is more important than the person holding it, with both hands and with the particular intensity of someone who is afraid of dropping the thing, and who knows that dropping it would be a kind of ending. The man who opened the door was Birch Calloway. He was 36 years old, unmarried, a sawyer who operated a small sawmill on Copper Hill Creek, and who lived alone in the house his grandfather had built from poplar and chestnut, and the particular stubbornness that building a house in the mountains requires, which is a stubbornness that becomes architectural, embedded in the joists and the sills, and the way the house sits on the slope as though it grew there rather than being placed. Birch was a large man, broad through the shoulders and thick through the forearms from years of handling timber and working the saw, and quiet in the way that large men are sometimes quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because their size says enough, and the addition of words feels redundant. He looked at the woman on his doorstep. He looked at her feet, which were the feet of a person who has been walking a long time without the things that walking requires. He looked at her face, which was thin and pale and wind-burned and young. She was perhaps 22 or 23, and which held the expression, half desperate and half defiant, of a person who has arrived at a place she does not know, and is hoping that the place will be kinder than the places she has left. "Come inside," he said. He said it without hesitation, before she spoke, before she offered the letter, before she explained herself or her feet, or her presence on his doorstep at dusk in December, because Birch Calloway had been raised by a grandmother who believed that a closed door in winter is a sin, and that every person standing on your step is a test of the person standing inside. And he had learned from her that the first thing you do when someone is barefoot in the cold is bring them inside, and that the explanations can wait until the person is warm, because explanations offered in the cold are shaped by the cold. They are shorter and more desperate and less true than the explanations the person would give if she were warm and safe and sitting by a fire with a cup of something hot in her hands. He brought her inside. He sat her in the chair by the stove. He put a kettle on. He found a pair of wool socks that were his, and that were much too large for her feet, but that were warm and dry, and he knelt on the floor and put the socks on her feet with the care of a man handling something fragile, not because her feet were fragile, but because the gesture was fragile, the gesture of a stranger touching another stranger's feet, being a thing that can be received as kindness or as intrusion, and that depends entirely on the hands doing the touching and on the intentions behind them. The woman's name was Sabine Nix. She said the name quietly, the way a person says a name she has been carrying alone for a long time, as a fact that connects her to a life that no longer exists in any form other than the name. "I have a letter," she said. "I can see that. It is not my letter. It is addressed to you. It is from your brother, Amos." Birch went still. He went still the way a man goes still when he hears a name he has not heard in a long time, and that arrives with the weight of everything the name carries. Memory, loss, the particular pain of a relationship that ended not with a fight, but with a silence that grew until the silence was louder than any fight would have been. His brother, Amos, younger by 6 years and different in every way that brothers can be different, restless where Birch was rooted, loud where Birch was quiet, always looking past the next ridge, had left Copper Hill 4 years ago, headed west, headed for Colorado, or Montana, or California, or wherever young men go when they are young, and restless, and believe that the thing they are looking for is in a place they have not been. Amos had written twice in the first year, short letters, cheerful, saying he was well and working, and that the mountains in Colorado were bigger than the mountains in Carolina, which they were, and then not at all, and the not at all had lasted 3 years, and 3 years of silence from a brother is a long time to wonder whether he is alive, and a long time to stop wondering, because the wondering hurts, and a long time to start wondering again, in the middle of the night, when the house is quiet, and the absence of a letter is louder than any letter would have been. Where did you get this letter? Your brother gave it to me, in Leadville, Colorado, 3 months ago. He was sick. He is dead now. He died on the 17th of October. I was with him. He was not alone. He asked me to bring this letter to you, because the letter says things he could not say when he was alive, and that he wanted you to know after he was not. Birch took the letter from her hands. He held it the way she had held it, with both hands, with the weight of it disproportionate to its size, the weight being not the weight of the paper, but the weight of the brother who had written it, and who was no longer alive to say the things the paper contained. He did not open it immediately. He waited until Sabine had eaten, cornbread and beans and a piece of salt pork, food that was plain and filling and warm, and she ate it with the hunger and the careful gratitude of a person who has not eaten in 2 days, and who knows that hunger makes food taste better than any seasoning, which was the truth, because the last of her money had gone to the train ticket from Asheville, and the 20-mile walk from the station to Copper Hill had taken her through terrain that did not have food, and that did have frozen ground that had destroyed her shoes, which had been poor shoes to begin with, bought second-hand in Asheville with the last of her coins, and which had surrendered completely somewhere around mile 12, the soles separating from the uppers, as though the shoes themselves had decided that they could go no farther, even if the woman wearing them could. The letter was 2 pages. Amos's handwriting, which had always been better than Birch's, was shaky, the shakiness of a hand that is losing its ability to be steady. The letter said, "I am sorry I left without explaining. I am sorry I stopped writing. The reasons are the reasons that men have when they are young and ashamed, and do not know how to say they are ashamed, so they say nothing instead. I worked in the mines. I got sick. The sickness is the kind that comes from the dust in the mines, and that does not get better. There is a woman here named Sabine who has been good to me, who brought me food when I could not work, and who sat with me when the coughing was bad, and who does not have anyone either. I am asking you to take care of her, because she took care of me, and because she has nowhere to go, and because taking care of someone who took care of your brother is the kind of thing you would do, because you are the kind of man who does those things, even when I have not been the kind of brother who deserves them." Birch read the letter twice. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and sat by the stove and looked at the fire and thought about Amos, who had been 22 when he left, and who had died at 26 in a mining town in Colorado, attended by a woman who was a stranger to Birch, but who had not been a stranger to Amos, and who had traveled by train and then walked 20 miles barefoot through frozen mountain roads in December to deliver a dead man's letter, because the dead man had asked her to revel, and because she had loved the dead man enough to do what he asked, even after the asking no longer came from a living mouth. "You walked from the station," Birch said. "I did. Without shoes. The shoes gave out. The road did not. Why did you not stop at a farm and ask for help? Because the letter was for you, and because stopping would have been a reason to not continue, and I could not afford a reason to not continue, because Amos asked me to bring it, and I told him I would, and the telling was a promise, and the promise was the last thing I gave him, and I will not break it by stopping at a farm, because my feet hurt." Birch looked at Sabine Nix. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he did not expect and did not plan for, and that has arrived in his life with the force of something that cannot be ignored or categorized or set aside for later consideration. He looked at a woman who was 22 years old and alone in the world, and who had walked barefoot in December through mountains she had never seen for a dead man's promise, and who was sitting in his chair in his wool socks, eating his cornbread, and he understood that the letter was not just a letter, and the request was not just a request, and the woman was not just a messenger, but a person Amos had sent, because Amos knew that Birch's house was large enough for 2, and that Birch's life had grown too quiet in the years since Amos left, and that the quietness was not the peace Birch pretended it was, but the loneliness he would not admit to, and that loneliness, like a cold house, needs someone to come inside and sit by the fire. "You can stay," Birch said. For how long? For as long as you need. Sabine stayed. She stayed through December, sleeping in the small room off the kitchen that had been Amos's room when the brothers were boys, and through Christmas, which was quiet, just the two of them, and a fire that Birch kept fed all day, and a meal that was considerably better than Birch's usual meals, because Sabine could cook, and because cooking was the language she spoke best, and the way she had cared for Amos in Leadville when he was too sick to care for himself, and was now the way she cared for Birch, the skill and the tenderness transferring from one brother to the other, with the naturalness of water, finding a new channel when the old one has closed. She stayed through January, the coldest January in 10 years according to the neighbors, when the snow came heavy and constant, and the creek froze solid, and the sawmill stopped because you cannot run a water-powered mill when the water is ice. She stayed through February, when the snow began to melt and the creek began to run, and Birch fired up the mill and began cutting again, and Sabine began cleaning the house in the way that a person cleans a house when the house is becoming hers, not with the tentative cleaning of a guest, but with the thorough and purposeful cleaning of a woman who has found the place where she intends to remain, and who is making the place worthy of the intention. Birch read the letter again in March. He read it sitting on the porch in the first warm afternoon of the year, with the dogwood beginning to bud and the creek running high and fast with snowmelt, and he read the line, "I am asking you to take care of her because she took care of me." And he understood that the taking care of had changed, that it was no longer an obligation or a favor or the honoring of a dead brother's request, but something else, something that had grown in the quiet of the winter, the way things grow in the quiet of the mountains, slowly and deeply, and without anyone noticing the growing, until the thing that has grown is too large and too rooted to be anything other than permanent. He told Sabine what he felt in April. He told her on the porch, in the evening, with the spring peepers singing in the creek bottom, and the smell of fresh-cut poplar drifting up from the mill, and the mountains dark against a sky that was turning from blue to violet. "Amos sent you here because he wanted me to take care of you," Birch said. "But that is not why I want you to stay. I want you to stay because the house is better with you in it, and I am better with you in it, and the reason has nothing to do with Amos, and everything to do with you." Sabine set down the mending she was holding and looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at the door on the 14th of December, with hope, and with the wariness that hope produces in a person who has learned that hope is not always rewarded. "I walked 20 miles barefoot to deliver a letter," she said. "I am not going to leave because the letter has been read." They married in May, in the house on Copper Hill Road, with the minister from the church in the valley, and the neighbors who had come to know Sabine over the long, hard winter, and who had accepted her, with the particular acceptance that mountain people offer to those who endure difficult things without complaint. An acceptance that is not given easily or quickly, but that once given is as permanent as the mountains themselves and as reliable as the creek that runs between them. Birch built a shelf for the bedroom. From cherry wood he had been saving for something important, and on the shelf he placed the family Bible, and inside the Bible he put Amos's letter, between the page that recorded births and the page that recorded deaths, because the letter was both, the record of a death and the beginning of a life that the death had made possible, which is not a trade that anyone would choose, but which is, sometimes, the trade that the world offers, and the accepting of it is the only grace available. Sabine wore the wool socks to the wedding. She wore them under her dress, with proper shoes over them, shoes Birch had ordered from Asheville in her size, but the wool socks were underneath, against her skin, because the socks were the first kindness, and she was not ready to take them off, and she suspected she never would be.